On September 11, 1963, Chief Obafemi Awolowo and some 16 other members of the Action Group Party were sentenced to prison for treasonable felony for plotting to overthrow the government of Prime Minister Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa by forceful means of arms. Their sentences ranged from 2 to 15 years. Awolowo in particular was convicted and sentenced to 10 years. Whether Chief Awolowo plotted a coup in 1962 is still being debated in Nigerian history. However, this episode unravels the argument. Did Chief Obafemi Awolowo really plot a coup in 1962? Let's find out. In March 1953, Lagosians booed and jeered Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardauna of Sokoto, and other politicians of the Northern People's Congress (NPC) at the Edo terminus as they prepared to board the railway that was to return them to northern Nigeria. The Lagos crowd openly lambasted them with shouts of feudalists and imperialist stooges, even as it was obvious that jeering them did not help anyone. This incident was shortly preceded by Bello's strong advocacy of the MPC's opposition to the motion for self-government planned for 1956, which was moved by Anthony Enahoro from Awolowo's Action Group, AG. Awolowo and the AG had severally surprised Bello and the MPC with their effectiveness, but this time the Northerners remained resolutely opposed to this and were hell-bent on blocking the motion, as it was, according to the North, a political suicide. Ahmadu Bello, who had personally ordered his followers to scuttle the proposal, was completely annoyed about the matter. He argued that an important issue such as the independence of a country as complex as Nigeria should first have been discussed by all the political parties concerned before it was moved, and only when approved should it be moved by the leader of the party with the idea, in this case, Chief Awolowo. The Sardauna, who feared that acceding to independence would simply afford the Southerners to take over the country since they already dominated the civil service of both regions and the country's economy, suggested that the South should leave the North alone if it continued to insist on the 1956 date. The Northerners said they were simply not ready to commit political suicide by substituting British rule with Southern domination. Bello accused Awolowo and his group of playing politics and dismissed the motion for having all the hallmarks of a rushed job. The Sardauna rightly insisted that the North would not be rushed into taking any decisions yet, at least not until they had consulted with their people back home. Awolowo was fully convinced that Enahoro's motion had succeeded in waking up the North from its slumber and galvanizing it to action. He, there and then, scribbled a note to the Sardauna seeking to know whether the North would support the South if the motion was delayed. Bello replied on the same note in the affirmative and added a cheeky reply, as soon as practicable. This had been preceded by the walking out of Chief Awolowo and his action groupers, and Kingsley Mbadiwe and members of the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons (NCNC) from the House of Representatives just before the MPC's motion of adjournment could be debated. This notwithstanding, the truncated House consisting of the MPC members and their British officials had proceeded to pass the motion for adjournment before departing for the North. The bitter disappointment felt by these Northerners continued for a long time and affected the relationship between them and their Yoruba rivals. On April 5, 1953, despite everything done by the authorities to prevent political foul play in the most serious flashpoints in the north, violent riots still broke out around Fege and the Sabongeri areas of Kano, where the Igbo clashed with the Hausa and the Fulani. The fights claimed several Igbo lives, leaving some Yoruba and other Southerners in their hundreds badly wounded. The mainly Hausa and Fulani rioters started fires and built barricades while the police tried to disperse them using tear gas and rifle butts to break up the protests. The riots were first seen as a swift response to the Lagos affront to their leader's dignity, but it was baffling to find that rather than attack the Yoruba followers of the action group, the Hausa and Fulani rioters in Kano directed the violence against Igbo traders and shopkeepers, which made some to feel that the Hausa and Fulani crowd may have been reacting to perceived sharp practices of Igbo traders who allegedly monopolized the skilled and distributive trade in Kano. On April 10, 1953, the deputy leader of the action group, Awolowo and Akintola, an energetic campaigner who also spoke fluent Hausa and Nupe, was asked by his party to personally lead a peace delegation to appease the northerners in Kano. But the district officer in Kano cancelled Akintola's scheduled campaign meetings due to escalation of hostilities even before his planned arrival in the city on April 16, 1953. The Emir of Kano could only manage an appeal radio broadcast asking the rioters to discontinue the protests and cooperate with the combined force of the colonial police and the army. This in itself did not end the hostilities until about 36 more deaths had been witnessed and 200 people seriously wounded. The political rivalry between Chief Obafemi Awolowo and Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardauna of Sokoto, no doubt resulted in the national crisis that riddled Nigeria's First Republic of the 1960s and somewhat nearly invalidated their otherwise respective, progressive and conservative contributions to nation building. Awolowo's vibrant and robust encroachment into the enemy territories of then Ilorin and Offa, today's Kwara states, was the genesis of the supremacy struggle of the two political leaders. Awolowo refused to recognize the Sardauna as the de facto ruler of Nigeria. He would not bow to him. Something was conflicting about the character of the two men that fueled the grudge. Awolowo was progressive, restless, republican, idealistic, and egalitarian. The Sardauna, on the other hand, was conservative, domineering, aristocratic, regal, and feudal. Both cared immensely about the welfare of their beloved peoples, hence the clash of personalities and interests. Awolowo also pinpointed the ardent wish for ethnic domination regarding democratic standards and the deficiency of an ideological principle as the fundamental casualties in the ruin of Nigeria's first attempts at democracy. However, it was the refusal of the politicians to cleave to the principles of democratic norms as well as tolerate opposing opinions or views that became tops in the collapse of the First Republic. This was immediately followed by the tenacity of office, no matter what, on the part of the headstrong incumbents, which did not help matters either. Also, the thoroughly blemished and compromised 1964 federal elections, which led to no conclusion or produced no definite results, coupled with the October 1965 fragmented and preposterous rigging of votes in the West, added to the fall of that republic. It must be noted that the symptoms of inner political turmoil were already evident long before the distressing falsification that surrounded the largely disputed 1963 census exercise, particularly by Southerners. It was true that Nigeria's First Republic concept of prime ministerial government was based on that of the Kingdom of Great Britain, where it originated. In this arrangement, the head of state Nnamdi Azikiwe was different from the head of government Tafawa Balewa, who was fastened with a form of political opposition that went to the largest party sitting in opposition, the Action Group, with its leader Obafemi Awolowo giving the title Leader of the Opposition. Even before things went wrong, Chief Awolowo, who believed that opposition, so intended and calculated in a parliamentary democracy, was both gracious and rewarding to the nation. The action group leader had been very forthcoming by seriously and regularly providing alternative viewpoints to the policies of the Balewa-led federal government. However, by its actions and body language, which smacked right of outright discourtesy, ungraciousness, and impertinence, the federal government insinuated that it had little choice to mount an all-out offensive on Awolowo, the leader of the opposition, whose parliamentary role it found meddlesome, embarrassing, and at best, a needless confusion. As they hoped that common sense would prevail and the looming political crisis in the country averted, Nigerians wondered why the federal government was always getting itself all worked up over Awolowo's ordinary good-intentioned advice and suggestions. Up to 1962, these circumstances were antecedents to the ingrained tendency of mutual antagonism between Chief Obafemi Awolowo on the one hand and Sir Ahmadu Bello, who maintained an iron grip on Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa on the other hand. Ultimately, this hostility would eventually lead to Awolowo's downfall and imprisonment. As early as February 1962, Chief Samuel Akintola, the Premier of the Western Region and the Deputy Leader of the Action Group, and the leaders of the Northern People's Congress agreed to change the balance of political forces in Nigeria by trying to discharge Awolowo and the Action Group. Awolowo's counterparts from other parties were each time quick to dismiss and lambast him in the press as overbearing, imperious, and tribalistic. From then on, they went in search of any pretext to subdue him by force. As a result, they found a perfect ally in Akintola, Awolowo's deputy. Akintola was disgruntled by his boss's no-compromise stance against the MPC, which prevented him and his group from obtaining federal appointments and patronages. Akintola began to rebuff and even snubbed his leader Awolowo, whom he strongly resented for interfering with the way and manner he ran his office as Premier of the Western Region. Whereas Ahmadu Bello's lieutenant in Lagos, Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa, often visited and consulted the Sardauna at the Premier's Lodge in Kaduna for advice and instructions, Akintola was encouraged and supported by Bello to pull the rug from under Awolowo's feet and become his own man once and for all. Intent on slapping down the doctrine of party supremacy, Akintola in January 1960 appointed ministers into his cabinet with no input whatsoever from the party caucus. The Premier was careful to act unilaterally when he single-handedly decided to abolish women's taxes in some 3 divisions of the Western Region. Also, his January 1961 mid-season plans to reduce the buying price of cocoa equally backfired. Awolowo started to have bad feelings about his deputy and was therefore more than ready to put paid to Akintola's clever efforts to beautify what had already qualified as anti-party activities. Akintola fought back and all hell broke loose. At the 1962 convention of the party in Jos, where he was dropped as deputy leader for his disloyalty and insubordination, Akintola and his supporters staged a walkout on their party and its caucus as a way of registering their disapproval. Chief Akintola headed home to receive the Sardauna, who was privately visiting Ibadan at the time, promising as he departed the Jos venue of the convention to punish the AG and Awolowo for the raw deal they handed out to him. It must be noted that while Chief Akintola's faction enjoyed the fanatical support of his ministers, including the party's General Secretary, Ayorosiji, Chief Awolowo's faction consisted of the party's federal legislators as well as its young ideologues who craved for a more radical ideology termed democratic socialism. Akintola, the Ogbomoso-born politician, appeared to already have the backing he needed to supplant his leader, even if it meant becoming a lapdog of the MPC-NCNC coalition government. By May 1962, it had become clear to everyone that the AG crisis had proved irredeemable as it was unsolvable. Once he became more footloose politically, including forming his party, Chief Akintola behaved with typical energy by making a trade with the MPC. Like a political tornado in 1959 and 1961, the expansionary policies of Awolowo's Action Group, which the Northern People's Congress considered a real threat, had seen the party tear through certain areas in the northern region considered to be a stronghold of the ruling MPC, and where the fortunes of the main opposition party, the Northern Elements Progressive Union (NEPU), led by Malam Aminu Kano, had proved marginal. To their dismay, the AG ruled out any hope of compromise and vowed to further its campaigns in these places, claiming that the process of their expansion, which had already started to flourish, had reached the stage where it was now irreversible. In the mid-1950s, the Sardauna's nerve had been stretched to a breaking point during one of several meetings in Kaduna with Chief Awolowo, who matter-of-factly demanded autonomy for the minority Christian Tiv and the Doma people in the north, over whom Bello exercised control. For the Sardauna, who was in too vile a mood to cooperate and who had long equated Awolowo's vying for the support of the minority tribes to try to tear asunder his policy of one north, one people, this was a no-go area. As far as the Sardauna was concerned, any attempt to attack the system would have to deal with that issue. He arrogantly informed his arch-rival Awolowo that strong rule from his regional government was a lamentable but permanent necessity, and that what the North needed was a period of calm without more surges of radical change. Believing Awolowo's request to be tantamount to a betrayal of the jihad led by his great-grandfather Sheikh Usman Danfodio, who founded the Sokoto Caliphate, the strong and vigorous Sardauna vowed to oppose any attempts that sought the breakup of his authoritarian and monolithic North. He warned the public to be vigilant and report anything suspicious. But Aminu Kano, another Muslim politician with a focus on Kano, believed otherwise. He asked many sarcastic questions about the emirate system in the north, against which he had expressed an ingrained aversion. The Malam bawled repeatedly and unrestrainedly at the authorities to introduce fair radical reforms. He was joined by his comrade in arms and first president of NEPU, Abba Mekwari, a learned man and well-established person in the system in Kano. Mekwari was forthrightly dissatisfied with his party's cautious and patient route to rudimental issues and urged his colleagues to refuse to soft-pedal their agitation and clamor for more radical changes. The forceful tone of Mekwari's bitterness and sometimes outrightly cruelty of his pronouncement really struck Chief Awolowo's fancy. Since he believed Mekwari and the AG had similar views on the feudal system of governance, Awolowo promptly wooed him to his side. Mekwari later emerged as the president of the Action Group's Northern Wing in 1955 and offers dogged and most successful politician Chief Josiah Sunday Olawoyin, a Yoruba who would be imprisoned a record 13 times, became the general secretary. The MPC's supposed traditional base had again been busted, and nothing could be more nerve-cracking for the Sardauna, who now felt threatened in his very domain. Offa soon began to vote with Awolowo's West, rejecting its classification as Bello's North. To the humiliation of the Sardauna, 4 members of the Action Group won their seats in the Northern House of Assembly. While this victory expectedly won the Yoruba Party accolades, it immediately dawned on the MPC government that it had to work hard to win back the confidence of the people. The fact that the AG could defeat Emir-sponsored candidates of the MPC shook the powerful premier of northern Nigeria and other party leaders. Indeed, the cloud of political defeatism was gradually descending on the Sardauna, a prince who brooked no opposition or interference. Whatever the changes facing the north, Ahmadu Bello now seemed more determined to overcome them. Subsequently, Awolowo started encroaching into the Middle Belt, where its United Middle Belt Congress UMBC leader from Boko, Joseph Tarka, signed an alliance with the AG, pledging to protect one another against the MPC. With the Middle Belt's success, Awolowo was further inspired to be more inventive and endearing with his calculations. The action groupers, who landed in both Adamawa and Borno in 1958, came on like gangbusters at precisely the right time. Their struggle instantly fetched them another alliance with the Borno Youth Movement, led by its founder and patron, the non-conformist Ibrahim Imam, the pioneer general secretary of the MPC, who had been invited back into the Borno Youth Movement after its metamorphosed in 1954 from the Borno Youth Improvement Association, which he founded in Maiduguri in 1949. The Borno Youth Movement represented Kanuri nationalism and stood out against any attempts by the Hausa and Fulani leadership of the MPC to lord it over Borno, which had always seen itself as superior to the Sokoto Caliphate of Usman Dan Fodio. A passionate character, powerful speaker, and one of Borno's greatest sons in modern times, Ibrahim Imam was largely responsible for the expansion of the MPC in northern Nigeria. He later became a political ally of Chief Awolowo, following his dumping of the MPC for the BYM, which later joined the Action Group in 1958. The political accommodation of Tarka and Imam by Awolowo was like a blow so sudden and vicious that the Sardauna stood still, trying to find a plausible excuse. It is a statement of verifiable historical facts that all three men, Awolowo, Tarka, and Imam, who were having a field day behind the Sardauna's back, happened to be his sworn enemies. Again, the Sardauna interpreted this gang-up to mean an effort to topple his political philosophy of one North, one people. In the meantime, Chief Awolowo and the Action Group had sealed off the challenge of the ruling MPC and continued to consolidate their hold on the Middle Belt up to 1959. Understandably, the party needed to gain national appeal or outlook, and fully aware it had no choice but to ally itself with the minority areas, it accordingly placed a new emphasis on state creation carrots which it offered their leaders. But first, they had to prove whether they were a good or bad risk by ensuring victory for the coalition in the coming federal elections. The Sardauna and other MPC leaders were convinced that the coalition would have a negligible impact, but they were soon proved wrong. In the 1959 federal parliamentary elections, several AG UMBC TIF candidates, including Joseph Tarka, who are propelled by sheer jingoism to be independent instead of being controlled by the Hausa Fulani's MPC, won seats in the federal legislature. Of course, Chief Awolowo and his party knew they were up against extreme antagonism and hostility, yet they entered the lion's den without hesitating and coasted home to a massive victory in Tiv land. Awolowo was feared so much for making these incursions into the north. In fact, he was hated. Top backers of the Sardauna and the MPC agreed that Chief Awolowo did not mean well for the north, that, given the chance, Awolowo would indoctrinate the common folks to be rude to the elders, shun religion, and slight the district heads and even the emirs. A situation like that could not be tolerated in the north. Awolowo was trying to destabilize the system. A law was passed in the Northern House forbidding any derogatory word or abuse directed against the person of the almighty Sardauna. After days of prevarication, the Sardana suddenly found himself compelled to disembark from his high horse to fight for the people's votes on dusty campaign trails and makeshift platforms. It was unprecedented in the history of the northern region. Before that time, it was the agents of the Sardana who campaigned. After Awolowo's daring infiltration to the north, it was the Sardana himself. It would be a massive understatement to say that the Sardana was preoccupied with the victory of the AG-UNBC coalition in the 1959 federal elections, where Chief Awolowo campaigned vigorously and cleared all the thief seats to boot. Bello practically flew into a bad panic. Even Awolowo, against whom he later directed his attack, was surprised by the virulence and viciousness of his criticisms. The country was starting to be conditioned by repression and commotion as Ahmadu Bello was determined to covertly take the battle to his opponents. The Sardana hungered for revenge. Nothing short of the seizure of Awolowo would satisfy this seemingly bottomless hunger. Towards the MPC's numerous attempts to gain the upper hand, Tafawa Balewa was ordered to use federal apparatus to break the opposition and its power of party machines. It would have been surprising if the Sardana had not muscled in. The Prime Minister, who at first appeared quite undisturbed about the developing situation as Bello, however, took his new assignment seriously. He began to work earnestly, fully aware that his party was already maintaining an iron grip on the north and having been assured of Akintola's cooperation. Therefore, disentangling the sources of the finances of the action group, which particularly enabled the party to stand redoubtable in its campaigns that led to the elections of 1959, represented for Balewa a realistic starting point. The idea was, as with the plan, to swoop down and bombard the leaders of the AG following Chief Akintola's allegation that the bank had granted many of them unguaranteed loan facilities. Purporting to be cracking down on cases of corruption, the Prime Minister got the ball rolling by flexing his muscle to ensure the enactment of a law in Parliament which established a tribunal of inquiry into the activities of the Western Regional Government. On May 16, 1961, after identifying the National Bank of Nigeria (NBN) as the chief provider of the financial services to the AG in the Western region, Balewa immediately appointed a Supreme Court Judge, Sir Valery Baremian, as sole commissioner to carefully examine and investigate the bank's dealings regarding the action group. 5 months later, on October 27, 1961, the Supreme Court, in answer to the prayers of the NBN's directors, stopped a determined Balewa government from going full steam ahead with its plan. The court ruled that it lacked the power to investigate a private enterprise, as the bank's shareholders did not whistleblow about any rot to be uncovered, in which case it must be heard by the courts anyway. The court, which frequently shied away from making such decisions on this occasion, came close to being dubbed by the Balewa government as full of interfering busybodies. However, the Prime Minister and the ruling MPC would not be deterred. Not long after the AG's internal party conflict in Western Nigeria had snowballed into a national crisis following the commotion and free-for-all fights in the region's House of Assembly, the Balewa-led federal government moved in and suspended the Western legislature. The Prime Minister then appointed a new administrator for the region, Dr. Moses Adekoyejo Majekodunmi. His aide-de-camp was a young army officer, Lieutenant Murtala Mohammed. Dr. Majekodunmi then selected Justice George Baptist Ayodola Coker on June 16, 1962, as chairman of the Coker Commission of Inquiry, tasked with probing 6 statutory boards of the Western region. This followed Chief Akintola's revelation that Chief Awolowo's henchmen and some AG officers had soiled their fingers with government funds. It also came on the heels of Parliament passing the Emergency Powers Statutory Corporations Inquiry Regulation. The ruling party's constant scheming to control the Western region through Majekodunmi, Balewa's personal friend and doctor, was not lost on the Yoruba, who vowed to resist their every move. Expectedly, while Chief Awolowo was found guilty by Justice Coker and his commissioners of unbecoming conduct during his tenure as Premier of Western Nigeria, Chief Akintola, the suspended Premier, came out unquestioned and unbruised upon assuming office. One is bound to wonder how things fell apart so quickly after attaining independence, especially as the MPC alliance with the NCNC had begun to cause some restiveness among the Northerners toward the end of 1961, which led to their conviction that finding a trusted Southern partner to work with might not be a bad idea after all. The Northerners found Chief Awolowo, whom many of them met for the first time at the 1950 Constitutional Conference in Ibadan, a rather haughty, unfriendly, but aggressively determined man, and hated his politics, which they considered a personal affront to the North. Awolowo's alleged self-first politics were attributed to having prevented the Yoruba from participating in national mainstream politics due to his ambition to be in charge of the federal government, as well as his blunt refusal to be subservient to the Sardauna, unlike his former deputy, Akintola, who not only worshipped and respected the Sardauna, but was also too willing to obey him. The Sardauna recognized that no one party could control the federal government, and therefore he knew he needed alliances. He wanted an alliance with the Yoruba because of religious and cultural affinity. But Awolowo disdained Ahmadu Bello, and the Sardauna knew it. With the collapse of the MPC-NCNC alliance, Chief Akintola, who the Northerners at first disliked, quickly warmed up to them. Akintola's unique selling point was that he spoke Hausa and Nupe fluently. They soon identified Akintola as the man who could be trusted and with whom they could form a party in the future. Chief Awolowo was singled out as the clog in the wheel of the anticipated partnership between the Yoruba of the West and their people in the North. The final blow was applied when the NCNC, with a shared hatred for the Action Group, which sprang from the same feeling of insecurity over the Yoruba party's championing of the cause of minorities in Calabar, Ogoja, and Rivers provinces, considered the living space of the dominant Igbo in the eastern region, quickly teamed up with the MPC. The Igbo-dominated NCNC not only equated the AG's call for a Calabar-Ogoja River state as a projectile placed at their underbelly, but they were also going to support whatever punishment the Sardauna and his party deemed fit for Chief Awolowo. With considerable following in the western region, the NCNC immediately saw an opportunity to fish in the troubled waters of the West and so joined hands with the MPC to push Awolowo and his men out of circulation. The MPC, which had always imbued itself with a pathological fear of the Action Group for standing in its way of supremacy in the country's politics, hoped to use Awolowo's treasonable trial to stop the AG's championing of minority rights in the middle belt of northern Nigeria and even in the Adamawa and Borno provinces. As far as Ahmadu Bello was concerned, Chief Awolowo and the Action Group's efforts to infiltrate the north and create states there, as well as to pluck Kaba and the Ilorin provinces from the north and merge them with western Nigeria, was nothing but a furthering of that aforementioned 19th century struggle between the Yoruba and the Fulani, during which the latter ousted the former. It was simply war by political means. Perhaps Bello had no comprehension of what was truly involved. The blame of the 1960 rebellion among the thieves, which the Sardauna heaped on Chief Awolowo and his Action Group, was actually a people's struggle to confront outside domination by the Fulani. No sooner had Balewa and the Sardauna put Awolowo away than they realized that if the North must continue to wield federal power, they needed to maintain Akintola in office as Premier of the West at any cost. Aware that the Igbo had their eyes focused on grabbing federal power for themselves, the northern leaders wasted no time in aligning with Chief Akintola and his Yoruba supporters in the west. With Akintola, who usually flew into a passion at the mention of the Igbo and who rained abuses on them at the slightest opportunity while the electioneering lasted, the northerners' estimation of Igbo usefulness suddenly dropped, changing their earlier calculations towards the 1964 election. Despite having half the seats, the northerners knew it was utterly impossible for them to form a government at the center without an ally in the south. The dragged-out case of treasonable felony against Chief Obafemi Awolowo and 30 of his supporters began on November 5, 1962 and ended in conviction and infliction of terms of imprisonment on September 11, 1963 by the trial judge, Justice George Shodeinde Sowemimo, who later became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Nigeria from 1983 to 1985. The lopsided federal structure was a stick of dynamite waiting to be detonated. Unable to influence policy using the ballot box, especially in the north, it became apparent to southerners that the only way for them to alter the northern region's control of the country was through a constitutional amendment or violence. However, restructuring the country and modifying the power control by the north was unlikely, since the MPC politicians controlled the parliament. As a result, the Southerners chose violence instead of a constitutional amendment. The prosecution had alleged that plans were made to overthrow the Balewa government by a force of arms. It was also alleged that men were sent to Ghana for training and that firearms and ammunition had been illegally imported. The prosecution then said Awolowo and his party supporters tried to bribe some Nigerian army officers to rebel against the government. Some of the evidence claimed that an attempt was made to recruit a Yoruba army officer, Colonel Samuel Ademulegun, into the plots. In his judgment, Justice Sowemimo did not declare that the prosecution had proved its case beyond reasonable doubt. Rather, he declared that he had no choice except to convict 18 of the accused, including Chief Obafemi Awolowo and Lateef Jakonde, among others. Sowemimo then sentenced them to various terms of imprisonment ranging from 2 to 15 years. The sentence came 2 months after Awolowo's first son, Segun, died in a car accident in July 1963. So, did Chief Obafemi Awolowo really plot a coup in 1962? Other Awolowo supporters claimed that the suspects were framed and that the whole affair was a show trial aimed at eliminating the opposition. A genuine plot to overthrow the Balewa government did exist. It was infiltrated by the special branch of the Nigerian police, which was then headed by John O'Sullivan, an Irishman. Another Irish police officer, John Lynn, the head of the police criminal investigation department, led the investigation into the plots and was a key prosecution witness. Although it was initiated by civilians, the Awolowo treasonable felony trial may be regarded as Nigeria's first coup plot. Having failed to obtain a majority at the federal elections of December 1959, the Action Group and its leader, Obafemi Awolowo, lost faith in the ballot box. Awolowo then set up a tactical committee on September 14, 1960, during a Federal Executive Committee meeting of the party. Samuel Ikoku, Anthony Enaoro, Sonya Onobamiro, and Awolowo himself were the members of that committee. They were given assignments to carry out in furtherance of the plots. The assignments included recruiting 200 youths for military training outside the country, buying arms, and so on. The information filed against the accused had 3 counts. 1. Treasonable felony contra Section 41 subsection B of the Criminal Code viz. Forming an intention to levy war against the Queen. 2. Conspiracy to commit a felony contra Section 516 viz. To levy war against the Queen. And 3. Conspiracy to effect an unlawful purpose contra Section 518 subsection 6 viz. To contravene the provisions of the Firearms Act, Cap 69, and regulations made thereunder. Out of the 31 persons tried on the various counts, 2 of them, Oladipo Maja and Richard Babalola, turned prosecution witnesses. 4 of them, Anthony Enahoro, Samuel Ikoku, Ayo Adebanjo, and Olubunmi Aluko, were not available at the trial and were discharged but not on merit. 7 of them, Bisi Onabanjo, Alfred Rewane, Chike Obi, Joseph Tarka, Murray Badmus, and Tunde Amuwo, were discharged and acquitted. 1 of them, Sumbo Ojibowu, died in prison, while Obafemi Awolowo, Lateef Jakonde, and 7 others lost their appeal and were sentenced accordingly. The whole plot was believed to have started in September 1960 with the establishment of that tactical committee. After losing the federal elections the year before in 1959, the action group was undoubtedly shocked and in serious disarray. Many felt that they should have joined a national government, to which Awolowo was vehemently opposed. At the Jos Conference of January and February 1962, the issue of joining the government at the time to form a national government became so heated and confrontational that Chief Akintola and some leaders walked out of the conference and returned home. At the peace meeting on February 9, 1962, Awolowo accused Akintola of spreading rumors that he was planning a coup. The latter denied the accusation. Although Awolowo denied Akintola's allegation, he went further to say that if Lagos interfered with the Western region, he had enough men and materials to shake the federal government to its foundation. Anthony Enahoro was assigned the duty of recruiting 200 young able-bodied men for military training in Ghana. Lateef Jakonde later interviewed these young men. Samuel Ikoku was then tasked with studying the dispositions of military installations in Nigeria and possible methods of gaining access to them. The trial ended a decisive stage in the political history of the country and, alternatively, started a new one. The fact that a man like Chief Obafemi Awolowo could have been led to the point of attempting a revolution might have given other Nigerians, both civilian and military, food for thought. The Awolowo Treasonable felony trial lit a fire that would later consume the fabric of the First Republic when some members of the Nigerian army carried out a military coup that wiped out the civilian leadership of the country on January 15, 1966. At the National Workshop on Nigerian History held in Kaduna in June 1993, one of Awolowo's supporters and co-accused who escaped from Nigeria rather than face trial, Samuel Grace Ikoku, openly confessed that the plot was real and that they had attempted to overthrow the federal government by extra-constitutional means. Ikoku, whose father, Alvan, adorns the 10 naira notes, was the General Secretary of the Action Group Party and the leader of the opposition in the Eastern Regional Assembly in Enugu. Samuel Ikoku said the party was fed up with the way the Nigerian system, the Nigerian state, and the Nigerian government were operating, and they were deeply committed to a change of government and saw that waiting for elections would not produce any solution to the problem. So, they started preparations for it, which had gone so far that Ikoku believed they would have pulled off the coup. Unfortunately for Awolowo, he had a police informant among his planners, so the police knew every move they were making. As a result, they were able to build a case against Awolowo, and his followers. However, they protested their innocence in court, saying that there was no coup and no plan to overthrow the government. In fact, they entered a plea of not guilty. However, the evidence was hard enough for the judges to sentence them to prison for treasonable felony. Finally, to answer the question, did Chief Obafemi Awolowo really plot a coup in 1962? Based on Samuel Ikoku's confession 30 years later, the simple answer is yes.